Hello, friends. Get ready as we learn how the Vikings survived the coldest nights of the year. The story starts now. In the depths of winter, when the world turned white and the air itself seemed to freeze in place, the Vikings faced their greatest enemy not on any battlefield, but in the simple act of surviving another night. The cold that swept down from the Arctic was unlike anything we might experience today, a bone-deep chill that could kill a man as surely as any sword. And yet these remarkable people not only endured but thrived in conditions that would challenge even our modern understanding of human resilience. Picture, if you will, a longhouse nestled against the harsh landscape of medieval Scandinavia, its timber walls blackened by countless winters, smoke rising steadily from the central hearth like a lifeline connecting earth to sky. Inside, families gathered not just for warmth, but for the ancient rituals of survival that had been passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. The Vikings understood something fundamental about cold that we have perhaps forgotten in our climate-controlled world. That surviving winter was not merely about staying warm, but about creating an entire ecosystem of comfort, community, and careful preparation. The longhouse itself was a marvel of practical engineering, though it might seem crude to our modern eyes. These structures, sometimes stretching over 100 feet in length, were designed with survival as their primary purpose. The thick timber walls, often made from oak or pine, were chinked with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal hair that created a surprisingly effective seal against the bitter winds. But the real genius lay in the roof, which was not simply thatched, but layered with such care that it became a living, breathing barrier against the elements. Birch bark formed the first layer, its natural oils repelling moisture. Then came thick bundles of straw or reeds, and finally, most ingeniously, a layer of growing sod that would actually improve with time, the grass roots binding everything together while providing additional insulation. Inside these remarkable structures, the central hearth burned continuously throughout the winter months, its flames fed by carefully hoarded wood that had been cut and dried during the previous warm seasons. The Vikings had learned through hard experience exactly which woods burned longest and hottest, and they knew how to bank a fire so that it would smolder safely through the night, ready to be coaxed back to full flame at dawn. Around this life-giving fire, the entire household would arrange itself in a careful hierarchy of warmth, with the most vulnerable, the very young and very old, positioned closest to the flames, while the hardiest members of the family slept further out in the relative coolness. But warmth was just one part of their survival strategy. The Vikings understood that surviving the coldest nights required a complex interplay of food, clothing, shelter, and human connection. Their winter diet was carefully calculated to provide the maximum number of calories needed to fuel their internal fires. They consumed vast quantities of preserved meats, fish that had been dried or salted during the summer months, and fermented dairy products that not only lasted through the winter, but actually improved with age. The fat from seals, whales, and domestic animals was particularly prized, not just for cooking, but for the dense energy it provided to bodies working hard to maintain their core temperature. Their clothing was a masterpiece of layered insulation that modern outdoor enthusiasts are only now beginning to appreciate. Next to their skin, they wore undergarments made from the softest wool or linen, materials that could wick moisture away from the body while still providing warmth even when damp. Over this came tunics and trousers made from tightly woven wool, often in multiple layers, each one trapping warm air while allowing for movement. But it was their outerwear that truly demonstrated their understanding of cold weather survival. Cloaks made from thick wool, sometimes waterproofed with lanolin or even tar, provided wind protection, while fur-lined boots and mittens protected the extremities where frostbite was most likely to occur. The furs themselves tell a story of intimate knowledge of the animal kingdom and its gifts. Each type of fur had its specific purpose in the Viking survival arsenal. Bear fur, thick and coarse, made excellent sleeping robes that could keep a person warm even in the most brutal conditions. Wolf fur, with its dense undercoat and longer guard hairs, was perfect for the trim on hoods and cuffs, where wind protection was crucial. Seal fur, naturally waterproof, was invaluable for those who had to venture out in wet conditions, while rabbit fur, soft and lightweight, provided insulation without bulk, perfect for undergarments or lining gloves. Sleep itself became a communal activity during the harshest months, not from any lack of privacy, but from pure practical necessity. Families would huddle together under massive piles of furs and woven blankets, sharing body heat through the long, dark nights. Children would sleep between adults, protected by the warmth of grown bodies, while even adults would think nothing of sharing sleeping spaces with relatives or close friends. This wasn't just about warmth, though that was certainly important, but about the psychological comfort that comes from human connection during the most challenging times of the year. The Vikings had also mastered the art of creating heat through activity, understanding that the human body was itself a furnace that needed to be stoked. Even on the coldest days, they found ways to keep moving, whether through indoor chores, storytelling that involved dramatic gestures, or even organized contests of strength that would get the blood flowing. They knew that sitting still in the cold was a path to death, and so they built movement into their winter routines as naturally as breathing. Their knowledge of food preservation was particularly sophisticated, born from necessity, but refined through generations of experience. They understood that surviving winter meant having enough stored calories to last not just through the cold months, but through the lean times of early spring when fresh food was still scarce, but winter stores might be running low. Smokehouse techniques that could preserve meat for months, fermentation processes that created vitamin-rich foods from simple ingredients, and storage methods that kept precious supplies safe from both rot and rodents. All of these were part of the complex survival knowledge that every Viking adult was expected to master. The preparation for winter began in earnest as soon as the previous winter ended, a cycle of gathering, preserving, and storing that defined the rhythm of Viking life. Summer was not a time for leisure, but for the frantic accumulation of everything needed to survive the coming cold. Wood had to be cut, split, and stacked in enormous quantities, not just for heating but for cooking and light. Food had to be hunted, gathered, and preserved using techniques that had been perfected over centuries. Clothing and bedding had to be repaired or replaced, with new furs acquired and old ones cleaned and treated to maintain their insulating properties. But perhaps most importantly, the Vikings understood that surviving winter was as much a mental challenge as a physical one. The long months of darkness, when the sun barely appeared above the horizon and the world seemed locked in an endless twilight, could drive people to despair if they weren't prepared. So they developed an entire culture around winter survival, creating rituals and traditions that gave meaning and structure to the dark months. Storytelling became elevated to an art form, with the long winter nights providing the perfect audience for tales of heroes and gods, adventures and mysteries that could transport the mind away from the immediate discomfort of cold and darkness. Music and poetry flourished during these indoor months, with skilled performers earning their keep by providing entertainment that lifted spirits and passed the time. The creation of intricate crafts, from wood carving to textile work, gave productive purpose to the long hours when outdoor work was impossible. These activities served multiple purposes. They kept hands busy and minds occupied. They maintained and improved essential skills, and they created a sense of accomplishment and progress, even when the outside world seemed frozen in time. The Vikings also understood the importance of light during the dark months, not just for practical purposes, but for psychological well-being. They developed sophisticated oil lamps that burned fish oil or animal fat, creating steady, warm light that could last through the longest nights. Candles made from tallow or beeswax were precious commodities, saved for special occasions or when extra light was needed for detailed work. The central hearth served not just as a heat source, but as the primary source of light for the household, its flickering flames creating a warm, welcoming glow that pushed back against the oppressive darkness outside. Their knowledge of weather patterns was remarkably sophisticated for people without modern meteorological tools. They could read the signs in cloud formations, wind directions, and animal behavior that would tell them when the worst storms were coming, allowing them to prepare accordingly. They knew how to reinforce their shelters before blizzards struck, how to ensure adequate ventilation to prevent dangerous buildup of smoke and carbon monoxide, and how to manage their resources so that they wouldn't run short during extended periods of severe weather. The social structures of Viking communities were particularly well adapted to winter survival, with complex systems of mutual aid and resource sharing that ensured no one would freeze or starve alone. Families with surplus food or fuel would share with those who had less, understanding that community survival was ultimately individual survival. The bonds forged during these difficult months often lasted for life, creating networks of mutual obligation and support that extended far beyond the winter season. Children were taught winter survival skills from the earliest age, not through formal lessons, but through the simple process of living and participating in the daily routines of survival. They learned to tend fires, to preserve food, to read weather signs, and to manage their own body heat through clothing and activity. These skills were not considered special knowledge, but basic life competencies that every person needed to master. And the teaching was integrated so naturally into daily life that children absorbed these crucial abilities almost without realizing they were learning. The Vikings had also developed sophisticated methods for dealing with the psychological challenges of winter isolation. They understood that humans are social creatures who need connection and stimulation to maintain mental health, and they built these needs into their winter routines. Gaming was popular, with elaborate board games that could occupy hours and provide intellectual challenge. Riddles and word games kept minds sharp, while contests of memory and recitation maintained cultural knowledge and provided entertainment. Religious and spiritual practices took on special significance during the winter months, providing both comfort and meaning during the most challenging times of the year. The long nights were seen as a time for introspection and connection with the spiritual world, and many important rituals and ceremonies were timed to coincide with the winter solstice and the gradual return of light. These practices served multiple purposes. They provided structure and anticipation during the dark months. They reinforced community bonds through shared observance, and they offered hope and meaning that helped people endure the hardships of winter. The management of resources during winter required careful planning and strict discipline. Every piece of fuel had to be rationed, every scrap of food conserved, every item of clothing maintained and preserved. The Vikings developed elaborate systems for tracking and managing their winter supplies, with designated individuals responsible for monitoring consumption and ensuring that resources would last through the entire cold season. This wasn't just a matter of practical organization, but of life and death calculation, where a mistake in planning could mean starvation or freezing before spring arrived. Their understanding of nutrition during winter months was remarkably advanced for their time. They knew that certain preserved foods provided not just calories, but essential nutrients that prevented scurvy and other deficiency diseases. Fermented foods, rich in vitamins and probiotics, were particularly valued, as were certain preserved vegetables and herbs that maintained their nutritional value through the winter months. They understood that a person could die from poor nutrition even if they had enough calories, and they planned their food preservation accordingly. The Vikings had also mastered the art of creating microclimates within their living spaces, using curtains, screens, and strategic placement of furniture to create smaller, more easily heated areas within the larger longhouse structure. These techniques allowed them to concentrate warmth where it was needed most while conserving precious fuel. They understood air circulation and ventilation in ways that allowed them to maintain warmth without creating dangerous conditions from smoke or carbon monoxide buildup. Personal hygiene during winter months required special techniques and careful management of resources. The Vikings understood that cleanliness was not just a matter of comfort, but of health, particularly during the close quarters of winter living. They developed methods for bathing and cleaning that conserved heated water and fuel while still maintaining adequate hygiene. Saunas, where available, served not just as cleaning facilities, but as social gathering places that provided warmth, relaxation, and community bonding during the difficult winter months. The care of domestic animals during winter was another crucial aspect of Viking survival strategy. Livestock provided not just food but warmth, companionship, and in some cases, additional heat for the living spaces. The Vikings developed sophisticated methods for sheltering and feeding their animals through the winter, understanding that the survival of their livestock was directly connected to their own survival. Animals were often brought into the same structures as humans, with carefully planned arrangements that took advantage of animal body heat, while managing the practical challenges of sharing living space with livestock. Tool maintenance and repair became a crucial winter activity, as the Vikings understood that their survival often depended on the proper functioning of their equipment. Long winter nights provided time for sharpening blades, repairing handles, and maintaining all the various implements that would be needed for survival and prosperity in the coming year. This wasn't just busy work but essential preparation, as a broken tool at the wrong time could mean the difference between life and death in a harsh environment. The preservation of knowledge and skills was another important aspect of winter survival, with the long indoor months providing opportunity for master craftsmen to pass their knowledge on to apprentices. This education system ensured that crucial survival skills were maintained and improved from generation to generation, with each winter providing intensive training periods where complex techniques could be taught and practiced under the guidance of experienced practitioners. The Vikings understood that winter survival was not just about individual preparation, but about community resilience, and they developed elaborate systems for organizing group activities that would benefit everyone. Communal projects undertaken during the winter months included everything from large-scale food preservation, efforts to the construction and repair of community infrastructure. These activities served multiple purposes. They accomplished necessary work. They provided social interaction and purpose during the dark months, and they reinforced the bonds of mutual dependence that held communities together. Their knowledge of medicinal plants and treatments was particularly important during winter, when injuries and illnesses could not be easily treated by outside experts. The Vikings maintained extensive knowledge of herbal remedies and medical techniques that could address the most common winter ailments, from respiratory infections caused by close indoor living to injuries that might occur during the daily activities of survival. This medical knowledge was often concentrated in certain individuals who served as healers for their communities, but basic medical skills were expected of most adults. The management of light and darkness during the winter months required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and physiology. The Vikings knew that too much darkness could lead to despair and illness, so they developed strategies for maximizing available light and creating artificial illumination that could maintain mental health during the darkest months. They also understood the importance of maintaining regular routines, even when the natural cycle of day and night was disrupted by the extreme conditions of northern winter. Sleep patterns during winter required special adaptation, as the natural rhythms of day and night were dramatically altered in the far north. The Vikings developed techniques for managing sleep that took into account both the practical necessities of survival and the psychological needs of the human body and mind. This included understanding how to maintain alertness during critical periods, how to take advantage of the brief daylight hours, and how to ensure adequate rest despite the challenges of cold and communal living. The creation and maintenance of warm clothing required year-round attention, with specific techniques for cleaning, repairing, and improving garments that had to last through multiple winter seasons. The Vikings understood the properties of different materials and how to combine them for maximum effectiveness, creating layering systems that could be adjusted for different conditions and activities. They knew how to waterproof materials, how to maintain insulation properties, and how to repair damage without compromising the protective qualities of their clothing. Fire management was perhaps the most critical skill for winter survival, requiring not just the ability to start and maintain fires, but to do so safely and efficiently over extended periods. The Vikings developed sophisticated understanding of different types of wood and other combustible materials, knowing which burned hottest, which lasted longest, which produced the least smoke, and which could be safely used in enclosed spaces. They understood ventilation, heat distribution, and fire safety in ways that allowed them to maintain life-giving warmth without creating dangerous conditions. The psychological aspects of winter survival were as important as the physical ones, and the Vikings developed elaborate strategies for maintaining mental health during the most challenging months of the year. They understood that isolation, darkness, and cold could lead to despair and mental illness, so they created social structures and activities specifically designed to combat these challenges. Storytelling, music, games, and communal activities all serve to maintain human connection and provide mental stimulation during the long indoor months. Food variety during winter was limited by preservation technology, but the Vikings worked hard to create as much diversity as possible within these constraints. They understood that monotonous diets could lead to both physical and psychological problems, so they developed techniques for creating different flavors and textures from their preserved foods. Fermentation, smoking, and other preservation methods were used not just to make food last, but to create variety that could help maintain morale during the long months when fresh foods were not available. The timing of various winter activities was carefully coordinated to make the most efficient use of limited daylight and fuel resources. The Vikings developed sophisticated schedules that maximized productivity while minimizing resource consumption, understanding that every hour of daylight and every piece of fuel had to be used as effectively as possible. These schedules took into account not just practical necessities, but also human needs for variety, social interaction, and mental stimulation. Water management during freezing conditions required special techniques and equipment, as the Vikings needed to maintain access to clean water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning, even when natural water sources were frozen solid. They developed methods for melting snow and ice efficiently, for storing water to prevent refreezing, and for rationing water supplies during the most extreme conditions when even melting ice might be difficult or dangerous. The Vikings understood that winter survival required not just short-term endurance but long-term planning that extended through multiple seasons and even multiple years. They developed strategies for managing resources across extended time periods, understanding that a harsh winter might be followed by another harsh winter, and that preparation for worst-case scenarios was essential for long-term survival. This thinking influenced everything from food storage techniques to the design of their shelters and the organization of their communities. Personal health maintenance during winter required special attention to issues that might not be as critical during other seasons. The Vikings understood how cold affected the human body, from the obvious dangers of frostbite and hypothermia to the more subtle effects of reduced sunlight and limited diet on overall health. They developed techniques for maintaining physical fitness, preventing illness, and treating the health problems that were most common during the winter months. The role of elderly community members during winter was particularly important, as these individuals possessed the accumulated knowledge and experience that could mean the difference between successful survival and disaster. The Vikings developed social structures that ensured elderly individuals were cared for during the harsh months, while also taking advantage of their knowledge and wisdom. Elder storytellers, craftspeople, and advisors played crucial roles in winter survival, providing both practical guidance and cultural continuity. Children's education during winter months focused heavily on survival skills, but it was integrated into play and daily activities in ways that made learning natural and enjoyable. The Vikings understood that children needed to master these skills while they were young, but they also recognized that children needed play and stimulation to develop properly. Winter games and activities were designed to teach crucial survival skills while providing the mental and physical stimulation that growing children required. The maintenance of trade relationships during winter months required special planning and resources, as the Vikings understood that their survival sometimes depended on goods and materials that could not be produced locally. They developed strategies for maintaining contact with trading partners even during the most difficult weather, and for managing the transportation and storage of traded goods under extreme conditions. These trade relationships often provided access to materials that were crucial for winter survival, from specialized foods to raw materials for tools and clothing. The Vikings had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when the worst winter weather was approaching, allowing them to make final preparations and ensure that they were ready for extended periods of extreme conditions. These signs might include changes in animal behavior, shifts in wind patterns, or alterations in the appearance of clouds and sky. This knowledge allowed them to take protective measures before conditions became too severe, potentially saving lives and resources. Recovery from winter and preparation for the coming year began even before winter had fully ended, with the Vikings understanding that the transition seasons were often the most dangerous times. They developed strategies for managing resources during the late winter months when supplies might be running low, but conditions were still too harsh for normal activities. They also planned for the spring thaw and the challenges it brought, from flooding to the need to quickly resume food production and other warm weather activities. The spiritual and cultural significance of surviving another winter was deeply embedded in Viking society, with celebrations and rituals marking the successful completion of the cold months. These celebrations served multiple purposes. They provided psychological release after months of hardship. They reinforced community bonds that had been crucial for survival, and they marked the beginning of preparation for the next winter cycle. Understanding that winter survival was a community achievement, these celebrations honored not just individual endurance but collective wisdom and cooperation. The legacy of Viking winter survival techniques extended far beyond their own time and place, influencing survival strategies in cold climates for centuries to come. Their understanding of insulation, community organization, resource management, and psychological resilience provided models that were adopted and adapted by later cultures facing similar challenges. The principles they developed, from the importance of community cooperation to the need for careful resource planning, remain relevant today for anyone facing extreme weather conditions or challenging survival situations. Modern outdoor enthusiasts and survival experts still study Viking techniques for cold weather survival, finding that many of their methods remain effective even with access to modern materials and technology. The layering systems they developed for clothing, their understanding of shelter design and heat management, and their psychological strategies for dealing with extreme conditions all provide valuable insights for contemporary applications. In many ways, the Vikings' integrated approach to winter survival, which combined practical skills with social organization and mental preparation, remains a model for comprehensive survival planning. The Vikings' success in surviving the coldest nights of the year was not just a matter of individual toughness or simple techniques, but the result of a sophisticated understanding of human needs and environmental challenges that had been developed and refined over many generations. Their approach to winter survival was holistic, addressing not just the immediate physical challenges of cold and darkness, but the long-term requirements for maintaining health, morale, and community bonds through extended periods of hardship. This comprehensive understanding of survival challenges and solutions provides valuable lessons for anyone seeking to understand how humans can thrive in extreme conditions through careful preparation, community cooperation, and the application of time-tested techniques that address both physical and psychological needs. The intricate web of survival knowledge that enabled the Vikings to endure their harshest winters extended into every aspect of their daily lives, creating a culture where preparation and resilience were not just practical necessities, but fundamental values that shaped their entire worldview. When we examine their methods more closely, we begin to see how they understood that surviving the coldest nights was not simply about having enough firewood or warm clothing, but about creating an entire ecosystem of interdependent strategies that supported human life in the most challenging conditions imaginable. Their approach to ventilation in winter dwellings reveals a sophisticated understanding of air quality that many modern people might find surprising. The Vikings knew that completely sealing a structure against the cold could lead to dangerous buildup of smoke and poisonous gases, but they also understood that too much ventilation would make heating impossible. They developed ingenious methods for managing airflow that maintained air quality while conserving heat, using carefully positioned openings that could be adjusted based on wind conditions and the intensity of their fires. These ventilation systems often incorporated multiple small openings rather than single large ones, allowing for better control of air movement and heat loss. The positioning of sleeping areas within the longhouse was determined by complex calculations that took into account not just proximity to heat sources, but also air quality, safety from fire, and social hierarchy. The most honored guests and family members might sleep closest to the fire, but this position also came with responsibilities for tending the flames during the night. Children and elderly individuals were positioned where they would receive optimal warmth while being protected from the dangers of sparks or shifting logs. The Vikings understood that sleeping arrangements were a matter of life and death, and they developed protocols for organizing these spaces that maximized safety, while ensuring that everyone received adequate warmth. The creation of emergency food supplies required techniques that went far beyond simple preservation, incorporating methods that could extend the shelf life of foods for years if necessary. The Vikings developed ways to create concentrated, high-energy foods that could sustain life, even when regular food supplies were exhausted. These emergency rations were often combinations of dried meats, rendered fats, and concentrated plant materials that could provide complete nutrition in small quantities. The preparation of these foods required specialized knowledge about which combinations of ingredients would remain stable over long periods and which would provide the most nutritional value per unit of weight and volume. Their understanding of clothing systems extended to the molecular level, though they would not have understood it in those terms. The Vikings knew that certain animal fibers had properties that made them particularly effective for specific purposes, and they developed techniques for processing these materials that enhanced their natural characteristics. They understood how the microscopic structure of wool created air pockets that provided insulation, how the oils in certain furs repelled water while maintaining warmth, and how different weaving techniques could create fabrics with varying degrees of wind resistance and breathability. The psychological strategies they employed to maintain mental health during the darkest months were remarkably sophisticated, incorporating techniques that modern psychology has only recently begun to understand and appreciate. The Vikings recognized that the human mind needed stimulation, challenge, and social connection to remain healthy, and they built these needs into their winter routines in ways that seemed natural and enjoyable rather than forced or artificial. Their approach to combating seasonal depression through light therapy, social activities, and meaningful work anticipated many modern treatment methods by centuries. The role of animals in Viking winter survival extended far beyond their use as food sources, encompassing complex relationships that provided warmth, companionship, protection, and even early warning systems for changing weather conditions. Dogs were particularly valuable during winter months, serving not just as hunting companions and guards, but as sources of warmth and emotional comfort during the long, dark nights. The Vikings understood animal behavior well enough to use their pets and livestock as weather forecasters, reading changes in animal activity that could indicate approaching storms or temperature shifts. Their methods for preserving and maintaining tools during winter months involved techniques that modern metallurgy has only recently begun to understand fully. The Vikings knew how different metals behaved in extreme cold, how to prevent corrosion and brittleness, and how to maintain sharp edges on blades even when they couldn't be used regularly. They developed oiling and storage techniques that could keep metal tools functional through months of disuse, and they understood how to repair and sharpen implements using materials that were available during winter months. The management of waste during winter required careful planning and sophisticated understanding of hygiene and health, as the normal methods of waste disposal were often impossible during the coldest months. The Vikings developed systems for managing human and animal waste that prevented contamination of their living spaces, while also conserving heat and avoiding the dangerous exposure that might come from frequent trips outside in extreme weather. These systems often incorporated composting techniques that actually generated heat as organic materials decomposed, providing an additional source of warmth during the coldest periods. Water storage and management during freezing conditions involved techniques that took advantage of the properties of ice, while preventing the damage that freezing water could cause to containers and storage systems. The Vikings understood how to use controlled freezing to preserve water supplies, how to prevent containers from cracking when water expanded into ice, and how to efficiently melt ice and snow to provide clean water for drinking and cooking. They developed specialized containers and storage methods that could withstand repeated freezing and thawing cycles without losing their integrity. The scheduling of winter activities required precise understanding of energy conservation and resource management, with every activity carefully planned to make the most efficient use of available light, heat, and human energy. The Vikings developed daily, weekly, and monthly routines that balanced necessary work with rest and recreation, understanding that overexertion during winter could be as dangerous as inactivity. These schedules took into account not just practical necessities, but also human psychological needs for variety and stimulation. Their approach to medical care during winter incorporated preventive medicine, emergency treatment, and long-term health maintenance in ways that addressed the specific challenges of cold weather survival. The Vikings understood how cold affected the human body's susceptibility to various illnesses and injuries, and they developed treatment protocols that could be implemented with limited resources and materials. Their medical knowledge included understanding of frostbite prevention and treatment, hypothermia recognition and management, and techniques for maintaining general health when diet and activity were restricted by weather conditions. The creation and maintenance of light sources during winter required not just practical knowledge of combustible materials, but understanding of human psychological needs for illumination and warmth. The Vikings developed techniques for making candles, oil lamps, and torches that could provide reliable light for extended periods, and they understood how to position and use these light sources to maximum effect. They knew how different types of light affected human mood and behavior, and they incorporated this knowledge into their winter survival strategies. Food preparation techniques during winter were designed not just to make preserved foods palatable, but to extract maximum nutrition from limited ingredients while creating variety that could help maintain morale during difficult months. The Vikings developed cooking methods that could enhance the nutritional value of their food while creating different flavors and textures from the same basic ingredients. They understood how to combine preserved foods in ways that provided complete nutrition, and they knew which cooking techniques would make their food most digestible and satisfying. The organization of work during winter months required understanding not just of practical necessities, but of human psychology and group dynamics, with tasks assigned and scheduled in ways that maintained productivity while preventing conflicts that might arise from forced proximity and limited resources. The Vikings developed systems for organizing group projects that could be completed indoors during bad weather, providing meaningful work that contributed to survival, while giving people a sense of purpose and accomplishment during otherwise inactive periods. Their techniques for maintaining body heat during the coldest nights involved sophisticated understanding of human physiology and thermal dynamics that enabled them to stay warm even when fuel was limited or unavailable. The Vikings knew how to use breathing techniques, physical exercises, and positioning methods that could help maintain core body temperature without requiring external heat sources. They understood how to use shared body heat effectively while maintaining comfort and dignity in close sleeping arrangements. The development of indoor games and entertainment during winter months served not just to pass time, but to maintain mental acuity, teach important skills, and strengthen social bonds that were crucial for survival. Many Viking games incorporated elements that taught strategic thinking, resource management, and decision-making skills that were directly applicable to survival situations. These activities provided intellectual stimulation that helped prevent the mental deterioration that could occur during long periods of reduced activity and social isolation. Their understanding of fabric care and maintenance during winter involved techniques for cleaning, repairing, and preserving textiles when normal washing and drying methods were impossible due to weather conditions. The Vikings developed methods for maintaining hygiene in their clothing and bedding while conserving water and fuel, and they knew how to repair and reinforce fabrics using materials that were available during winter months. These techniques ensured that their protective clothing and bedding remained functional throughout the winter season. The management of domestic animals during extreme weather required understanding not just of animal husbandry, but of how to integrate animal care with human survival needs in ways that benefited both species. The Vikings developed techniques for sheltering livestock that took advantage of animal body heat while protecting both humans and animals from the dangers of sharing living spaces. They understood animal psychology well enough to manage stressed animals during confinement, and they knew how to maintain animal health when normal grazing and exercise were impossible. Their approach to food rationing during winter incorporated sophisticated understanding of human nutrition and psychology that enabled them to maintain health and morale while conserving limited supplies. The Vikings understood how to calculate caloric needs for different individuals based on age, size, and activity level, and they knew how to distribute food in ways that maintained fairness while ensuring that everyone received adequate nutrition. They developed techniques for making small amounts of food seem more satisfying and for managing hunger when supplies were running low. The creation of emergency shelter systems for use during extreme weather events required understanding of rapid construction techniques and materials that could provide life-saving protection when primary shelters were damaged or inaccessible. The Vikings knew how to quickly construct temporary windbreaks, heat reflectors, and insulated spaces using materials that were commonly available, and they understood how to modify existing structures to provide better protection during the worst weather. These emergency techniques could mean the difference between life and death when primary survival systems failed. Their methods for maintaining communication between communities during winter involved techniques for traveling and signaling in extreme weather conditions that enabled them to share resources and information even when normal travel was impossible. The Vikings developed specialized equipment and techniques for winter travel that could allow messengers and traders to maintain contact between settlements even during the worst weather. They understood how to read weather patterns well enough to find brief windows of opportunity for travel, and they knew how to prepare for and survive emergency situations that might occur during winter journeys. The preservation of cultural knowledge and traditions during winter months served not just to maintain cultural identity, but to provide the mental stimulation and social cohesion that were essential for psychological survival during extended periods of hardship. The Vikings understood that humans needed meaning and purpose to maintain mental health, and they used the long winter months as opportunities for intensive cultural education that strengthened community bonds while preserving essential knowledge for future generations. Their understanding of sleep management during extreme conditions incorporated knowledge of human circadian rhythms and the effects of light exposure on sleep quality that enabled them to maintain healthy sleep patterns even when normal day-night cycles were disrupted by extreme seasonal variations. The Vikings developed techniques for managing sleep schedules that took advantage of brief periods of natural light, while ensuring that people received adequate rest despite the challenges of cold and communal sleeping arrangements. The development of specialized winter tools and equipment required understanding not just of practical functionality, but of how extreme conditions affected the performance and durability of different materials and designs. The Vikings created tools that were specifically designed for winter use, incorporating features that prevented freezing, provided better grip in cold conditions, and remained functional even when exposed to extreme temperature variations. They understood how to maintain and repair these specialized tools using materials that were available during winter months, Their techniques for managing fire safety during extended indoor living incorporated understanding of how different materials behaved when heated and how to prevent dangerous accidents while maintaining necessary warmth. The Vikings developed protocols for fire management that minimized risks while ensuring that fires could be maintained safely throughout the night and during periods when adults might be sleeping or incapacitated. They understood how to construct and maintain fireplaces and heating systems that provided maximum warmth while minimizing the risk of accidental fires. The organization of storage spaces during winter required understanding not just of preservation techniques, but of how to access and manage supplies efficiently when outdoor storage was impossible and indoor space was limited. The Vikings developed systems for organizing and cataloging their winter supplies that enabled them to locate needed items quickly while maintaining optimal storage conditions for different types of materials. They understood how to rotate supplies to ensure that older items were used first while maintaining access to emergency reserves. Their approach to personal hygiene during winter incorporated techniques for maintaining cleanliness and health when normal bathing and washing facilities were unavailable due to weather conditions. The Vikings developed methods for cleaning themselves and their clothing that conserved water and fuel while preventing the spread of disease in close living quarters. They understood how to maintain dental health, skin care, and general cleanliness using materials and techniques that were practical under extreme conditions. The management of interpersonal relationships during extended confinement required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and conflict resolution that enabled them to maintain harmony in close quarters despite the stresses of survival. The Vikings developed social protocols and customs that minimized conflicts while providing outlets for tension and disagreement that might arise during long periods of forced proximity. They understood how to organize social hierarchies and decision-making processes that maintained order while respecting individual dignity and rights. Their techniques for maintaining mental acuity during periods of reduced stimulation incorporated activities and exercises that prevented the cognitive decline that could occur during long periods of limited activity and sensory input. The Vikings understood that the human brain needed challenge and stimulation to remain healthy, and they developed mental exercises, games, and learning activities that could be practiced during winter months to maintain and improve cognitive function. The development of techniques for emergency medical treatment during winter incorporated understanding of how to provide life-saving care when professional medical help was unavailable and resources were limited. The Vikings learned to treat hypothermia, frostbite, injuries from falls on ice, respiratory infections caused by close indoor living, and other medical emergencies that were common during winter months. They developed techniques for improvising medical supplies and equipment using materials that were available during emergencies. Their understanding of nutrition during pregnancy and child care in winter conditions incorporated knowledge of how to maintain maternal and infant health when diet and activity were restricted by weather. The Vikings understood the special nutritional needs of pregnant and nursing women during winter months, and they developed techniques for ensuring that children received adequate nutrition for proper growth and development, despite the limitations of preserved foods and reduced variety in winter diets. The creation of backup systems and contingency plans for winter survival incorporated understanding that primary survival systems might fail, and that successful survival required multiple layers of protection and preparation. The Vikings developed redundant systems for heating, food storage, water supply, and shelter that could provide protection even when primary systems were damaged or depleted. They understood how to prepare for worst-case scenarios while maintaining hope and morale during difficult times. Their techniques for maintaining spiritual and emotional well-being during winter incorporated religious practices, meditation, and community rituals that provided comfort and meaning during the most challenging times of the year. The Vikings understood that humans needed spiritual nourishment as much as physical sustenance, and they developed practices that could provide emotional support and community connection, even when physical conditions were harsh and demanding. The management of limited resources during extended survival situations required understanding not just of rationing and conservation, but of how to maintain the tools and systems that were essential for long-term survival. The Vikings developed techniques for maintaining and repairing their survival equipment, using minimal resources while ensuring that essential systems remained functional throughout the winter period. They understood how to balance immediate needs with long-term sustainability in ways that maximize their chances of surviving extended periods of hardship. The intricate knowledge systems that the Vikings developed for winter survival encompassed far more than the obvious necessities of warmth and food, extending into subtle understanding of human behavior, environmental psychology, and the complex interactions between physical survival and mental resilience that determined who would see another spring and who would not. Their mastery of winter survival was built upon generations of accumulated wisdom that recognized survival as a holistic challenge, requiring solutions that addressed every aspect of human existence during the most demanding months of the year. The Vikings understood that the quality of air within their winter dwellings could determine the difference between health and sickness, between clear thinking and the dangerous confusion that could lead to fatal mistakes. They developed sophisticated methods for managing humidity levels within their longhouses, understanding that air that was too dry could damage respiratory systems and make people more susceptible to illness, while air that was too moist could lead to dangerous condensation that might freeze on walls and create hazardous conditions. Their techniques for controlling humidity involved careful management of cooking activities, breathing patterns of occupants, and even the placement of containers of water that could add moisture to overly dry air or absorb excess humidity when conditions became too damp. The timing of daily activities during the shortest days of winter required precise understanding of energy conservation and the psychological effects of light exposure that enabled them to make the most of extremely limited daylight hours. The Vikings learned to structure their days around the brief periods of natural light, scheduling the most important and demanding activities for these precious hours, while reserving less critical tasks for the long periods of darkness. They understood how exposure to natural light affected human mood and energy levels, and they developed techniques for maximizing the psychological benefits of sunlight, even when it was available for only a few hours each day. Their approach to managing fear and anxiety during winter storms incorporated understanding of how extreme weather events could trigger panic responses that might lead to dangerous decisions or actions. The Vikings developed techniques for maintaining calm during blizzards and other extreme weather events, including breathing exercises, mental focusing techniques, and group activities that could help people remain rational and cooperative when natural instincts might urge panic or flight. They understood that fear could be as deadly as cold, and they built fear management into their survival protocols as systematically as they managed their food supplies or heating systems. The creation of specialized winter clothing for different activities required understanding not just of insulation and protection, but of how different types of work and movement affected the body's heat production and loss patterns. The Vikings developed clothing systems that could be quickly modified for different activities, understanding that the clothing needed for outdoor work was different from what was optimal for indoor activities, and that rapid transitions between environments required garments that could be easily adjusted without losing critical protection. They created layering systems that allowed for fine-tuned temperature control while maintaining freedom of movement necessary for survival activities. Their techniques for maintaining sharp mental focus during long periods of monotonous indoor living incorporated activities and practices that prevented the mental dulling that could occur when daily routines became repetitive and unstimulating. The Vikings understood that mental sharpness was crucial for survival, as important decisions might need to be made quickly and accurately even after months of routine indoor living. They developed mental exercises, challenging games, and learning activities that could maintain cognitive agility while providing entertainment and social interaction during the long winter months. The management of interpersonal tensions that inevitably arose during extended confinement required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics that enabled communities to remain cohesive and cooperative even under extreme stress. The Vikings developed conflict resolution techniques, social rituals, and community practices that provided outlets for frustration and disagreement, while maintaining the unity that was essential for survival. They understood how to balance individual needs with community requirements in ways that prevented the social breakdown that could be as deadly as any physical threat. Their approach to food psychology during winter incorporated understanding of how limited food variety and quantity affected not just physical health, but mental well-being and social relationships. The Vikings knew that hunger and food monotony could lead to depression, irritability, and conflicts that might threaten community survival. So they developed techniques for making limited food supplies seem more varied and satisfying, while maintaining fair distribution that prevented resentment and competition. They understood the psychological importance of occasional treats or special meals that could provide emotional comfort during difficult periods. The development of indoor exercise routines during winter confinement required understanding of how to maintain physical fitness and health when normal outdoor activities were impossible and living spaces were limited. The Vikings created exercise systems that could be performed in small spaces while providing the physical activity necessary to maintain muscle tone, cardiovascular health, and mental well-being during months of reduced activity. They understood how physical fitness affected not just individual health, but the ability to perform survival tasks and contribute to community welfare during emergencies. Their techniques for managing sleep disturbances caused by cold, noise, and crowded sleeping arrangements incorporated understanding of sleep physiology and environmental factors that could disrupt rest and recovery. The Vikings developed methods for creating optimal sleeping conditions even in challenging environments, including techniques for reducing noise, managing temperature variations, and creating psychological comfort that could promote restful sleep despite less than ideal physical conditions. They understood that adequate sleep was essential for maintaining the physical and mental capabilities necessary for survival. The creation of emergency communication systems within winter settlements required understanding of how to maintain contact and coordinate activities when normal communication methods might be disrupted by weather conditions or structural problems. The Vikings developed signaling systems, message relay techniques, and emergency protocols that could function even when visibility was limited and normal movement between buildings was dangerous or impossible. They understood that communication breakdowns during emergencies could lead to confusion and mistakes that might prove fatal. Their approach to managing the psychological challenges of uncertainty during winter incorporated understanding of how the human mind coped with extended periods of stress and unpredictability. The Vikings developed mental techniques, spiritual practices, and community rituals that helped people maintain hope and emotional stability, even when facing potentially life-threatening situations with uncertain outcomes. They understood that psychological resilience was as important as physical preparations for survival, and they built mental strength training into their winter survival protocols. The management of tool and weapon maintenance during winter required understanding not just of metallurgy and craftsmanship, but of how extreme conditions affected the performance and reliability of essential equipment. The Vikings developed techniques for preventing metal corrosion, maintaining sharp edges on blades, and keeping mechanical systems functional despite exposure to moisture, temperature extremes, and extended periods of disuse. They understood that tool failure during winter emergencies could be catastrophic, so they built redundancy and maintenance protocols into their equipment management systems. Their techniques for maintaining motivation and purpose during long periods of survival-focused living incorporated understanding of human psychology and the need for meaning and achievement even during the most basic struggles for existence. The Vikings developed systems for setting and achieving goals, recognizing accomplishments, and maintaining a sense of progress and purpose, even when daily life was focused primarily on basic survival needs. They understood that humans needed more than just physical sustenance to maintain the will to survive through extended hardship. The development of techniques for emergency shelter construction during winter storms required understanding of rapid construction methods and materials that could provide life-saving protection when primary shelters were compromised or inaccessible. The Vikings learned to construct emergency windbreaks, heat reflectors, and insulated spaces using whatever materials were immediately available, and they developed techniques for quickly improving existing structures to provide better protection during sudden weather emergencies. These skills could mean the difference between life and death when primary survival systems failed unexpectedly. Their understanding of how different personality types and individual characteristics affected survival capabilities enabled them to organize their communities and assign responsibilities in ways that maximized everyone's contributions while compensating for individual weaknesses. The Vikings recognized that some people were naturally better at certain survival tasks, while others excelled in different areas, and they developed social systems that allowed communities to benefit from diverse strengths while providing support for individual limitations. They understood that successful survival was often a community effort that required understanding and cooperation between different types of people. The management of waste heat and energy conservation during winter required sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics and energy transfer that enabled them to capture and utilize every possible source of warmth while minimizing energy losses. The Vikings developed techniques for recovering heat from cooking activities, human body heat, animal warmth, and even the heat produced by decomposing organic materials, incorporating these energy sources into their heating systems to maximize efficiency while minimizing fuel consumption. They understood that energy conservation could be as important as energy production for long-term survival. Their approaches to maintaining dental health and preventing tooth problems during winter incorporated understanding of how diet limitations and reduced hygiene opportunities affected oral health and overall physical condition. The Vikings developed techniques for cleaning teeth and maintaining oral hygiene, using materials that were available during winter months, and they understood how tooth problems could affect nutrition and overall health in ways that might compromise survival. They recognized that seemingly minor health issues could become serious problems when medical care and normal treatment methods were unavailable. The development of techniques for managing claustrophobia and psychological stress caused by confinement incorporated understanding of human spatial needs and techniques for creating psychological space and privacy, even in crowded conditions. The Vikings learned to create visual barriers, designated personal spaces, and privacy protocols that could help people maintain mental health even when living in very close quarters for extended periods. They understood that psychological comfort was essential for maintaining cooperation and preventing conflicts that might threaten community survival. Their knowledge of how to predict and prepare for the most dangerous winter weather events incorporated understanding of meteorological patterns, natural signs, and animal behavior that could provide advance warning of potentially life-threatening conditions. The Vikings developed sophisticated weather prediction techniques that enabled them to take protective measures before the most severe storms and cold snaps, potentially saving lives through better preparation and timing of survival activities. They understood that accurate weather prediction could be the difference between successful preparation and being caught unprepared by dangerous conditions. The management of lighting during winter required understanding not just of combustible materials and flame management, but of how different types of light affected human psychology, work efficiency, and social interaction. The Vikings developed techniques for creating and managing various types of artificial light that could provide not just illumination, but psychological comfort and social atmosphere during the long, dark months. They understood how light color, intensity, and distribution affected human mood and behavior, and they incorporated this knowledge into their lighting strategies. Their techniques for maintaining flexibility and joint health during periods of reduced activity incorporated understanding of how cold weather and limited movement affected the human musculoskeletal system. The Vikings developed exercise routines and movement practices that could prevent stiffness, maintain joint mobility, and preserve the physical capabilities needed for survival activities even after long periods of reduced activity. They understood that physical flexibility and strength were essential for performing emergency tasks that might arise suddenly during winter months. The creation of entertainment and cultural activities during winter served not just to pass time, but to maintain the cultural identity and social bonds that gave communities the cohesion and purpose necessary for collective survival. The Vikings understood that humans needed more than just physical survival to maintain the will to live through extended hardship. So they developed rich traditions of storytelling, music, games, and crafts that could provide meaning and enjoyment even during the most difficult periods. These activities served multiple purposes, providing education, social bonding, skill development, and psychological support simultaneously. Their approach to managing individual privacy and personal space during communal winter living incorporated understanding of human psychological needs for solitude and personal autonomy, even during periods when survival required close cooperation and shared resources. The Vikings developed social protocols and physical arrangements that could provide individuals with opportunities for privacy and personal reflection, even when living in very close quarters. Understanding that respecting individual psychological needs was essential for maintaining community harmony and cooperation. The development of techniques for emergency medical care during winter incorporated understanding of how to provide life-saving treatment using limited resources and improvised materials when professional medical help was unavailable. The Vikings learned to treat hypothermia, frostbite, injuries, infections, and other medical emergencies using techniques and materials that were available during winter months, and they developed protocols for managing medical crises that could threaten individual or community survival. They understood that medical knowledge could be as important as food and shelter for surviving winter emergencies. Their understanding of how to maintain hope and positive outlook during extended periods of hardship and uncertainty incorporated psychological techniques and community practices that could help people maintain emotional resilience even when facing potentially life-threatening situations. The Vikings developed mental practices, spiritual beliefs, and social rituals that provided emotional support and maintained morale during the most challenging periods of winter survival. They understood that hope and positive attitude were not just psychological luxuries, but essential survival tools that could affect physical health and decision-making capabilities. The management of resource allocation during winter required sophisticated understanding of community dynamics, individual needs, and long-term planning that enabled communities to distribute limited supplies fairly while maintaining the capability to survive unexpected emergencies. The Vikings developed systems for managing food, fuel, clothing, and other essential resources that balanced immediate needs with long-term sustainability, while preventing conflicts that might arise from competition for scarce materials. They understood that resource management was as much about psychology and social dynamics as it was about practical distribution. Their techniques for maintaining personal hygiene during winter incorporated understanding of how cleanliness affected not just comfort and social relationships, but physical health and disease prevention in close living conditions. The Vikings developed methods for washing, grooming, and maintaining cleanliness using limited water and heating resources, while preventing the spread of illness in crowded winter quarters. They understood that personal hygiene was not just a matter of comfort, but a survival necessity that could affect the health and safety of entire communities. The development of backup plans and contingency strategies for winter survival incorporated understanding that successful survival required preparation for multiple scenarios and the flexibility to adapt to changing conditions or unexpected challenges. The Vikings created multiple layers of protection and alternative strategies that could be implemented when primary survival plans were disrupted by weather, accidents, illness, or other unforeseen circumstances. They understood that rigid survival plans could be as dangerous as no plans at all, and they built adaptability and redundancy into all their survival preparations. Their mastery of psychological endurance during the endless winter nights required profound understanding of how the human mind could be trained and conditioned to find strength even in the darkest moments, when the very concept of spring seemed like a distant fantasy that might never return. The Vikings developed sophisticated mental techniques that went far beyond simple distraction or entertainment, incorporating practices that actually rewired their thinking pattern to find meaning and purpose, even in the midst of survival struggles that would have broken the spirits of less prepared people. They understood that the mind, like the body, could be strengthened through practice and conditioning, and they built mental resilience training into their daily winter routines as systematically as they managed their physical needs. The intricate relationship between nutrition and mental state during winter months required understanding not just of which foods provided necessary calories and nutrients, but of how different types of nutrition affected mood, energy levels, and cognitive function during the stress of survival living. The Vikings discovered that certain preserved foods, particularly those rich in specific fats and fermented nutrients, could actually improve mental clarity and emotional stability during difficult periods, while others might provide adequate calories but leave people feeling depressed or mentally sluggish. They learn to balance their winter diets not just for physical survival, but for optimal mental performance, understanding that clear thinking and emotional stability were often the difference between life and death during winter emergencies. Their techniques for managing the social dynamics of mixed-age groups during winter confinement incorporated sophisticated understanding of how different generations could contribute to survival, while learning from each other in ways that strengthened the entire community. The Vikings developed systems that utilized the experience and wisdom of elderly members, while providing opportunities for younger people to develop survival skills and leadership capabilities, creating intergenerational cooperation that maximized the community's collective knowledge and capabilities. They understood that successful winter survival often depended on combining the accumulated wisdom of older generations with the energy and adaptability of younger community members. The development of specialized breathing techniques for cold weather survival incorporated understanding of how respiratory patterns could be used to generate internal heat, maintain mental clarity, and even provide pain relief during exposure to extreme cold. The Vikings discovered breathing methods that could help maintain core body temperature during brief exposures to extreme conditions, and they developed techniques for using controlled breathing to remain calm and focused during emergency situations that might otherwise trigger panic responses. These breathing techniques became integrated into their daily winter routines, providing both practical benefits for cold weather survival and psychological tools for managing stress and anxiety. Their understanding of how different materials absorbed, retained, and radiated heat enabled them to create microenvironments within their larger living spaces that could provide optimal conditions for specific activities while conserving precious fuel and energy. The Vikings learned to position heat-absorbing stones, metals, and other materials in ways that could capture warmth during the day and slowly release it during the night, creating more stable temperature conditions that required less active heating. They developed techniques for using thermal mass, insulation, and air circulation that could create comfortable zones for sleeping, working, and socializing, while minimizing the fuel consumption required to maintain livable conditions. The management of water resources during freezing conditions required not just understanding of how to prevent water from freezing, but sophisticated knowledge of how to purify, store, and distribute water safely when normal sanitation systems were impossible to maintain. The Vikings developed methods for treating water to prevent disease while conserving fuel needed for heating, and they created storage systems that could maintain clean water supplies throughout the winter while preventing contamination that might spread illness through close-knit communities. They understood that waterborne illness during winter could be particularly devastating when normal recovery resources were limited and medical care was unavailable. Their approaches to maintaining courage and determination during periods when survival was uncertain, incorporated understanding of how fear and doubt could be managed and channeled into productive action rather than paralyzing anxiety. The Vikings developed mental practices that acknowledged realistic dangers while maintaining focus on actionable solutions and positive outcomes, creating psychological frameworks that enabled people to function effectively, even when facing potentially life-threatening situations. They understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act appropriately despite fear, and they built courage training into their winter survival preparations. The creation of indoor growing systems for winter food production required understanding of how to maintain plant life in controlled environments using limited resources and artificial conditions. The Vikings developed techniques for sprouting seeds, growing certain vegetables indoors, and maintaining small-scale food production that could provide fresh nutrition during the months when no outdoor growing was possible. These indoor growing systems were not just backup food sources, but important contributors to nutrition and morale, providing fresh flavors and vitamins that could prevent deficiency diseases while giving people hopeful activities that connected them to the coming spring. Their knowledge of how to repair and maintain complex systems during winter incorporated understanding of how extreme conditions affected different materials and mechanisms, and how to keep essential equipment functional when replacement parts were unavailable and working conditions were challenging. The Vikings developed repair techniques that could restore function to damaged tools, weapons, and household equipment using improvised materials and methods, understanding that equipment failure during winter could create life-threatening situations. They built redundancy and repairability into their essential systems, while developing the skills and knowledge necessary to maintain these systems throughout the winter months. The management of individual health monitoring during winter required understanding of how to recognize and respond to the subtle signs of developing health problems before they became serious threats to survival. The Vikings learned to identify the early symptoms of hypothermia, malnutrition, depression, and other conditions that were common during winter months, and they developed treatment protocols that could address these problems using available resources and techniques. They understood that preventing serious health problems was much more effective than trying to treat them after they had become critical. So they built health monitoring and preventive care into their daily winter routines. Their techniques for creating and maintaining social rituals during winter served not just to provide entertainment and cultural continuity, but to strengthen the psychological bonds and shared identity that enabled communities to function cooperatively during the most stressful periods of survival. The Vikings developed ceremonies, celebrations, and regular social activities that reinforced community values while providing emotional support and shared meaning that helped people maintain their humanity, even during periods focused primarily on basic survival needs. These rituals served as psychological anchors that reminded people of their cultural identity and shared purposes beyond mere survival. The development of emergency evacuation procedures for winter emergencies required understanding of how to quickly and safely relocate people and essential supplies when primary shelters became dangerous or uninhabitable. The Vikings created protocols for emergency evacuation that could be implemented rapidly even during severe weather, including techniques for quickly gathering essential supplies, moving people safely through dangerous conditions, and establishing emergency shelter using whatever materials and locations were available. They understood that the ability to quickly relocate during emergencies could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe when primary survival systems failed. Their understanding of how to maintain weapons and defensive capabilities during winter incorporated knowledge of how extreme conditions affected fighting efficiency and how to prepare for potential conflicts, even when normal training and preparation activities were limited by weather conditions. The Vikings developed techniques for maintaining combat readiness during winter months, including methods for keeping weapons functional in extreme cold, maintaining physical fitness for fighting, and coordinating defensive strategies that could be implemented even when communities were focused primarily on survival activities. They understood that winter vulnerability might attract raiders or predators, so they maintained defensive capabilities even during the most challenging survival periods. The management of psychological privacy during communal winter living required sophisticated understanding of how to create mental and emotional space for individuals, even when physical privacy was impossible to maintain. The Vikings developed social protocols and personal practices that allowed people to maintain psychological autonomy and individual identity, even when living in very close quarters for extended periods, understanding that individual mental health was essential for community survival and cooperation. They created systems for respecting personal boundaries, managing interpersonal conflicts, and providing individual support that maintained community harmony while honoring individual psychological needs. Their techniques for managing the transition periods between winter and other seasons incorporated understanding of how these changing conditions created both opportunities and dangers that required specific preparation and response strategies. The Vikings understood that spring thaw and fall preparation were often the most dangerous times of year, when changing conditions could create unexpected hazards, while people were adjusting from one survival mode to another. They developed protocols for managing these transitions safely, while taking advantage of the opportunities they provided for resource gathering and system maintenance. The creation of educational systems during winter months served not just to pass time or maintain cultural knowledge, but to develop the skills and understanding that would be essential for future survival and prosperity. The Vikings used the long winter months as intensive training periods when experienced adults could pass on crucial knowledge to younger community members, covering everything from practical survival skills to cultural wisdom and technical knowledge that would be essential for maintaining community capabilities from generation to generation. They understood that education was not separate from survival, but an essential component of long-term community resilience. Their approach to managing individual psychological needs during community survival situations incorporated understanding of how to balance personal autonomy with collective responsibility in ways that maintained both individual mental health and community cooperation. The Vikings developed systems that honored individual personality differences and personal needs, while maintaining the unity and cooperation that were essential for group survival. Understanding that forcing everyone into identical roles and behaviors could be as destructive as allowing complete individualism that ignored community needs. The development of techniques for emergency communication during winter storms required understanding of how to maintain contact and coordinate activities when normal communication methods were disrupted by extreme weather conditions. The Vikings created signaling systems, message relay techniques, and communication protocols that could function even when visibility was limited, and normal travel between locations was dangerous or impossible. Understanding that communication breakdowns during emergencies could lead to confusion and potentially fatal mistakes in coordination and response. Their knowledge of how to create and maintain multiple heating zones within winter shelters incorporated an understanding of thermal dynamics and air circulation that enabled them to optimize heating efficiency while providing appropriate temperatures for different activities and needs. The Vikings developed techniques for creating warmer areas for sleeping and socializing, moderate temperature zones for working and storage, and cooler areas for certain types of food preservation and equipment storage, all within the same overall shelter system. They understood how to use natural air circulation, thermal barriers, and heat source positioning to create these temperature zones without requiring excessive fuel consumption. The management of tool sharing and equipment allocation during winter required sophisticated understanding of community resource management and individual responsibility that enabled communities to make optimal use of limited tools and equipment while preventing conflicts and maintaining accountability. The Vikings developed systems for sharing tools, weapons, and equipment that ensured everyone had access to necessary implements, while maintaining care and responsibility for these valuable resources. Understanding that tool loss or damage during winter could create serious problems for individual and community survival. Their techniques for maintaining mental acuity during periods of limited stimulation and reduced social interaction incorporated activities and practices that prevented cognitive decline and maintained the sharp thinking that was essential for survival decision-making. The Vikings developed mental exercises, problem-solving activities, and intellectual challenges that could maintain and improve cognitive function even during long periods when daily routines were repetitive and opportunities for mental stimulation were limited. Understanding that mental sharpness was as important as physical strength for survival success. The creation of backup heating systems and alternative energy sources for winter survival incorporated understanding of how to develop multiple approaches to heat generation that could provide redundancy and security when primary heating systems failed or fuel supplies were exhausted. The Vikings developed techniques for creating heat using various types of fuel, different burning methods, and even heat generation through composting and fermentation, creating multiple options that could be implemented when primary systems were compromised by weather, accidents, or resource depletion. Their mastery of time perception and psychological endurance during the seemingly endless winter nights incorporated sophisticated understanding of how the human mind could be trained to find rhythm and meaning in the cyclical nature of survival activities, transforming the repetitive necessities of daily winter life into a form of meditative practice that actually strengthened mental resilience rather than wearing it down. The Vikings understood that the mind's perception of time could be altered through conscious practice and ritual, and they developed techniques for making the long winter months feel like a meaningful journey rather than a punishment to be endured, using the natural rhythms of daily survival activities as a framework for mental discipline and spiritual growth. Their comprehensive understanding of how individual psychological makeup affected survival capabilities enabled them to develop personalized approaches to winter preparation and survival that maximized each person's strengths while compensating for individual weaknesses through community cooperation and mutual support. The Vikings recognized that some people were naturally more resistant to cold, while others had better social skills for maintaining community harmony, and they created survival systems that utilized these individual differences as community assets, rather than trying to force everyone into identical survival patterns that might not suit their natural capabilities or psychological tendencies. The development of advanced food preservation techniques that went beyond simple drying and salting incorporated understanding of fermentation, controlled spoilage, and chemical processes that could create foods with enhanced nutritional value and extended shelf life, while providing variety and flavor that maintained morale during the monotonous winter months. The Vikings discovered methods for creating preserved foods that actually improved with age, developing complex flavors and nutritional profiles that provided not just sustenance but genuine eating pleasure that could lift spirits and provide psychological comfort during the most difficult periods of winter survival. Their techniques for managing the complex social hierarchies and power structures that developed during extended periods of community survival incorporated understanding of how leadership roles and decision-making processes needed to adapt to the unique pressures and requirements of winter survival situations. The Vikings developed flexible social systems that could shift between different leadership models, depending on the specific challenges being faced, understanding that the skills needed for normal community leadership might be different from those required for survival crisis management, and that successful communities needed to be able to adapt their social structures to changing survival requirements. The creation of sophisticated signaling and communication systems that could function during the worst winter, whether incorporated understanding of visual, auditory, and even tactile methods for conveying information when normal speech and visual contact were impossible due to wind, snow, and darkness. The Vikings developed communication techniques that could work over various distances and in different weather conditions, creating redundant communication systems that ensured essential information could be transmitted even during the most severe storms, and when normal communication methods had failed completely. Their understanding of how to maintain individual identity and personal dignity during periods when survival necessities required sharing almost everything and living in extremely close quarters, incorporated sophisticated psychological techniques for preserving sense of self and personal autonomy, even when individual privacy and independence were severely limited by survival requirements. The Vikings developed mental practices and social protocols that allowed people to maintain their individual personalities and self-respect, even when daily life required constant cooperation and sharing that might otherwise erode personal boundaries and individual identity. The development of emergency medical techniques that could be performed using only materials and knowledge that were available during winter isolation incorporated understanding of how to treat serious injuries and illnesses using improvised tools and natural remedies when professional medical care was completely unavailable and transportation to medical facilities was impossible due to weather conditions. The Vikings learned to perform basic surgery, treat serious infections, manage difficult births, and provide other critical medical care using techniques that could be implemented by non-specialists using materials that were commonly available during winter months. Their mastery of energy conservation techniques extended beyond simple fuel management to include understanding of how human energy, food energy, and environmental energy could be optimized and coordinated to create sustainable survival systems that could function throughout the winter without depleting essential resources. The Vikings developed comprehensive approaches to energy management that considered every aspect of their survival systems, from the calories consumed by different activities to the heat generated by various processes, creating integrated systems that maximized efficiency while maintaining the capability to respond to emergencies and unexpected challenges. The creation of cultural and spiritual practices that provided meaning and purpose during periods when daily life was focused primarily on basic survival needs incorporated understanding of how humans required more than just physical sustenance to maintain the will to live and the mental clarity necessary for good survival decisions. The Vikings developed rich traditions of storytelling, music, spiritual observance, and artistic creation that transformed winter survival from a grim endurance test into a meaningful experience that actually strengthened cultural identity and community bonds, while providing the psychological nourishment that was essential for long-term survival success. Their techniques for managing the complex logistics of community survival incorporated understanding of how to coordinate the activities of multiple individuals and families in ways that maximized efficiency and effectiveness, while maintaining fairness and preventing conflicts that might threaten community unity. The Vikings developed sophisticated systems for organizing work assignments, resource allocation, decision-making processes, and conflict resolution that enabled communities to function smoothly even under the stress of survival situations, where mistakes or conflicts could have life-threatening consequences for everyone involved. The development of advanced shelter modification techniques that could improve the effectiveness of existing structures using materials and methods that were available during winter months incorporated understanding of how to diagnose and address weaknesses in shelter systems, while making improvements that enhanced protection without requiring extensive construction or specialized materials. The Vikings learned to identify and repair heat leaks, improve ventilation systems, strengthen structural elements, and enhance comfort and functionality using techniques that could be implemented even during severe weather when major construction work was impossible. Their understanding of how to maintain hope and positive expectations during periods of genuine uncertainty about survival outcomes incorporated psychological techniques that acknowledged realistic dangers while maintaining focus on positive possibilities and actionable solutions, rather than allowing fear and despair to paralyze decision-making and cooperative action. The Vikings developed mental practices that helped people maintain emotional equilibrium and productive attitude, even when facing genuinely life-threatening situations where the outcome was uncertain and success was not guaranteed. As the long winter nights finally began to shorten, and the first subtle signs of spring's eventual return became visible to those who knew how to look for them, the Vikings who had successfully survived another brutal season carried with them not just relief at having endured, but a deep satisfaction that came from having mastered one of nature's greatest challenges through the application of accumulated wisdom, community cooperation, and individual resilience that had been tested under the most demanding conditions possible. Their survival was not just a matter of luck or simple endurance, but the result of sophisticated understanding of human needs and environmental challenges that had been developed and refined through countless generations of people who had faced similar trials and learned to not merely survive, but to thrive even in conditions that would challenge the limits of human adaptability and determination. The legacy of Viking winter survival techniques represents more than just historical curiosity or primitive survival methods, but a comprehensive understanding of how humans can create sustainable communities and maintain both physical health and psychological well-being, even under the most challenging environmental conditions, providing lessons that remain relevant for anyone seeking to understand the full range of human adaptive capability and the importance of preparation, community cooperation, and mental resilience in overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. Their success in surviving the coldest nights of the year stands as a testament to human ingenuity, determination, and the power of accumulated knowledge, passed down through generations of people who understood that survival was not just about individual toughness, but about creating systems of mutual support and comprehensive preparation that could sustain entire communities through the darkest and most demanding periods that nature could